Hello, my name is Kobe Wong. I'm a second-year medical student here at the University of North Dakota School of Medicine and Health Sciences. Welcome to July's Twitter Journal Club. Today, we will be discussing the association between age at diabetes onset and subsequent risk of dementia. So for a little background, there's an increase in prevalence of diabetes with more than 90% of diabetics having type 2. It is well known that diabetes is associated with higher risk of cardiovascular morbidity and mortality, along with mortality from non-vascular conditions. What is a little less known is the neurocognitive outcomes still remain a little uncertain. So there have been some large-scale multi-cohort meta-analyses which have shown an association between diabetes and dementia, but the limitation being that there was no preference for the age of onset. And the age of onset of type 2 diabetes is known to be important for mortality and cardiovascular outcomes, again, with those neurocognitive aspects being a little bit more uncertain, which leads us into today's paper. So their objective was to determine whether a younger age at diabetes onset is more strongly associated with incidence of dementia, and their question being, what is the association between age at onset of type 2 diabetes and subsequent risk of dementia? Looking at the methods here, the study population was determined from the Whitehall 2 study, which is an ongoing cohort study started between 1985 and 1988 that follows 10,308 people, 6,895 which were men, and 3,413 which were women. When breaking down, age, sex, and race distributions are all reflective of the total UK population, and routine clinical examinations were performed every 4 to 5 years. Follow-up data collection was collected using the UK National Health Service electronic records. Looking at the primary and secondary exposures, the primary exposure was type 2 diabetes, and they used 4 different ways to determine that. They used the fasting glucose, which was 126 milligrams per deciliter or higher at the clinical exam, use of diabetes medication, reported physician diagnosed diabetes, or a record of diabetes in the HES database. For secondary exposures, they looked at the Finnish diabetes risk score or find risk, fasting glucose, and prediabetes. And the find risk was just a risk of diabetes looking at multiple different life factors such as age, activity, medications, BMI, diet, etc., a couple other things. The outcomes, dementia cases were ascertained by 3 national registries, the HES database, the Mental Health Services dataset, and the Office for National Statistics Mortality Register. Looking at some results tables here, this was the main results table from the paper, and they compared no diabetes, which is the second column there, which is the reference column. They looked at diabetes onset for less than 5 years, between 6 and 10 years, and greater than 10 years. And they looked at these for age groups at 55, 60, 65, and 70. In this longitudinal study, a younger age at onset of diabetes was significantly associated with a higher hazard ratio of dementia. Previous meta-analyses of the association between type 2 diabetes and dementia reported a risk ratio between 1.43 and 1.62. And these numbers are in line with results from the present study, which when combined, all of the age ranges combined to a hazard ratio of 1.52. So it lines up nicely with previous research. This figure here is that find risk score I mentioned earlier. And there was no significance for any range here. So this shows that a high risk of diabetes is not associated with an incidence of dementia. So a good example of sometimes no significance being significant to us. The next table here is looking at the association of fasting glucose-based prediabetes and diabetes with risk of dementia. Again, no significance in the association between prediabetes and risk of dementia. So people with prediabetes are not more likely to have dementia over time. The last table here is looking at the role of cardiovascular comorbidities in the association between diabetes and incidence of dementia. So the reference group was people with diabetes, and they were looking at people with diabetes with CHD, heart failure, stroke, or any combination of those 3. So a person with diabetes with none of those things is the reference. The only one that shows significance was diabetes with stroke. So diabetes with stroke alone doubles your likelihood of dementia. If you have stroke, CHD, and heart failure, that increases your likelihood 5-fold. So this highlights the need to address cardiovascular comorbidity in individuals with diabetes. So studies that explicitly consider age at diabetes onset or diabetes duration remain scarce. Precise mechanisms behind the association between type 2 diabetes and dementia are still unknown. There are a couple hypotheses out there. One hypothesis is that systemic and brain insulin resistance are linked, and that impaired peripheral insulin action leads to hyperglycemia, which may affect dementia risk due to glucose neurotoxicity, vascular injury, and the accumulation of advanced glycation end products. Another hypothesis highlights the role of microvascular dysfunction, which leads to inflammatory and immune responses, oxidative stress, increased blood-brain permeability, and altered blood flow regulation. The pathophysiology of early and midlife diabetes, however, the contribution to dementia needs further research. Looking at the strengths and limitations of this study, a couple of strengths: the precise measures of diabetes from midlife to old age and the long follow-up for dementia. The repeated clinical examinations they did every 4 to 5 years helped to eliminate undiagnosed diabetes, which is fairly prevalent around the world and also in the UK. The availability of a range of covariates via those repeated clinical exams allowed for the minimization of bias due to confounders. On to the limitations. They did not look at the different types of dementia subtypes. Participants in longitudinal studies also tend to be healthier than the general population, and in this study, the rates of diabetes and dementia were lower than in the general population. The use of glycated hemoglobin for a more stable marker of diabetes status was unavailable for use until later on in the study, so they just did not use it altogether to remain consistent. The dementia ascertainment was based on linkage to that electronic health record rather than in-person screening, which could miss milder forms of dementia. And age of participants at the end of the follow-up implies that younger participants have not yet reached an age when dementia is more prevalent. So, in conclusion, in this longitudinal cohort study with a median follow-up of 31.7 years, younger age at onset of diabetes was significantly associated with higher risk of subsequent dementia. Thank you.